Hey roadies, it's Luke here from church, and I just wanted to thank you guys so much for being willing to help set up and tear down each week and just serve in such an incredible way. Just wanted to take a few minutes here to go over how to set up and tear down the drums. It's probably one of the most tricky instruments to be able to set up, and so hopefully this video will help you guys to understand about why things are set up a certain way and the best way to be able to do that so that it's really efficient both on Saturday at prayer meeting and on Sunday at church. If you guys have any questions, make sure you ask because I'm here to help. But thank you guys once again for serving in such an incredible way. Alright guys, so we understand when it comes to building that we always need to start with a good foundation. And for the setting up the drum kit, your bass drum is your foundation. Now with all of these drums, as I talk today, there's some terminology that you're going to probably hear that I wanted to bring you up to speed with. For starters, firstly, every drum has what's called a resonant head, the one that resonates, that doesn't get hit, and it has a batter head. For the bass drum, our batter head has two little patches on here for where the kick drum or the bass pedal, where they hit. So this is our batter head, the one that gets hit, and then we have our resonating head. This one has a hole or a cutout in it for the microphone, which we'll go over later. And then the drums are made up of the drums and the hardware. So the hardware is going to be all the stands and the things that attach the drums to the drums, and as well as the cymbals, they attach the cymbals to their stands. So we'll go over that in a minute. But yeah, we start with our foundation with our bass drum. Okay, this is where we start from. So the bass drum, when I'm setting anything up on the drum kit, I'm usually sitting in the seat in the position that I'm going to be playing from. It kind of gives me a point of reference for where the drum kit gets set up. So I always position the bass drum in the middle of the rug from each side and about 5 inches back from the front of the rug. There's a line there that you can use as a point of reference, and then once you have that in position you can see that it rocks. And so we have two stands either side. There's a set of arrows to give you the line of where it needs to go, and so we loosen this wing nut on the stand and we get it in line. Usually it's going to line up with the front of this bass drum resonant head. Okay? And we tighten this wing nut. Now the thing about this is sometimes it's going to get tight really soon, but what you'll find is if you wiggle a little bit, it'll fall into a groove, and you want to get that all the way so that it's into that groove and then tighten it up. Once it's in that groove and tightened up, you can check to see that it's in position. It's still going to rock. We have to go around to the other side and do exactly the same thing. Once the other side's in, you'll find that this bass drum will be about 3/4 of an inch off the ground. If it's not, these need to be extended, but they shouldn't be touched ever. So usually every time you tighten those up, it's going to be about 3/4 of an inch off the ground. So once you've located your stick bag, you'll find in the front pocket a tool that's going to be really helpful in setting up the next part of the drums, which is the double bass pedal. Now, the key looks like so, and you'll find that there's two pedals. One pedal is going to have two beaters on it. The second pedal won't have any beaters on it. Now the first thing to remember with these pedals is as soon as you take them out of the bag, make sure that the chain is lined up on the teeth. That way they're going to work properly. Same thing for the second pedal. That chain is lined up right on the teeth there, and you'll notice that one of these is tensioned accordingly with the first pedal, but there will be a control arm that you'll also find in the bag that will help tension this second beater to the second pedal. Now, underneath these beaters you'll find the attachment. It's like a tongue and groove that slides on the bottom of the bass drum, and there is an adjusting wing nut on the top of that will need to be tightened once it's on there. Once you've slid that on to the bottom of the bass drum, tighten that wing nut and ensure that these beaters are lined up with those white spots I showed you earlier on the bass drum, right in the middle. And in the middle. The next step will be to tighten this control arm on to the bass pedals. And I'll show you a little close-up on how that's done. So we can see that the chain's on the teeth. We can see that the second beater is loose at the moment. So we want to get it in line with the other beater. Okay? This control arm slides on so that the grub screw is on top, and we slide it on as far as it can go. As far as it can go. Once it's on as far as it can go, we use our key to tighten it up. Make sure it's nice and tight. The beaters are lining up with the white spots, and our control arm is as parallel without touching this lug with the batter head of the bass drum as possible. We line these up and we adjust this control arm as close as we can to the second pedal, and we tighten it up as tight as it will go. Once that's in position, this needs to be facing then back towards the drummer, and we're good to go. Great. So the next step is setting up the tom-toms, and we start with the tom mounts. When anything's labeled on the drum kit, you're going to notice that it's going to have either a right or a left on it. Now, it's not the drummer's right and left, but if you're looking at the drums from the front, it's going to be your view in either left or right. So we start out with TR or tom rack right. We put that in position, and you'll notice that there's a little stopper there. That stopper, as long as it is flush with the front, you can tighten it up all the way and it's good to go. Same thing with tom rack left. Pop that in the mount, make sure that they're flush, and you can tighten those up. Okay, they're in position. Now, thing to note, okay, these tom mounts, they should already be set at the correct angle, and they should never need to be adjusted. Please never straighten them out or try and fold them up after you tear down. Just leave them in position. Okay, they'll fit well inside the bazookas or the hardware storage cases, no problem. Okay, and then from there we set up our tom-toms. Okay, we've got our batter head. Our batter head has a logo at the top, and that logo should always be facing the drummer. It is labeled tom right. Okay, and so we put that on the tom right tom mount. Slide that on, and you'll notice that there's a line here where to stop, and so you'll stop there and you'll tighten it up so that it's tight in position. Same thing with tom rack left. It has the logo that should be facing the drummer. It is a little bit bigger than tom rack right. We loosen that wing nut, we get it in line with the line that's on there, and then we tighten it up. The key with these is that they need to be about 2 inches apart at the middle, and basically facing so that if you put your palms out sitting in the drummer's seat, they'll be nice and flat in front of you. They shouldn't be facing like that. They shouldn't be facing out like that. Okay? So if you put your hands out in front of you and put them down, they should be nice and flat for the drummer. Alright, so next we're going to move to some hardware for cymbal stands, and we're going to start with the hi-hat stand. Now, just a word on cymbal stands. One of the things that we've noticed that makes setting up the drums a lot easier is if the telescopic extensions for each of the cymbal stands stays the same. If they're never adjusted when they're getting torn down on a Saturday night or on a Sunday afternoon, then when setting it up on a Saturday morning or Saturday for a music rehearsal or a Sunday for church, they're in the correct position, ready to go. So when it comes to these telescopic parts of the cymbal stands, whether it be the hi-hat or the ride cymbal or the crash cymbal, just leave these telescopic adjustments in position. They should be there ready to go. There will be a line on there as well so that you know if they have been moved out of position. But we'll start with the hi-hat stand. Okay? It also has a pedal. The pedal part needs to be pulled out, and it has these 2 prongs that get squeezed together and go into the holes at the bottom of the stand. Once they're in position, it should sit like so. And then the legs do need to be adjusted. We loosen the wing nut, holding the legs in place, and it sits like so. When this is in position, and we'll show you a close-up of that, it should be just to the outside of the second bass drum pedal. This leg needs to go in front of the chain closest to the drummer without getting in the way of that movement. And then once they're side by side, so that I can transfer my feet from one to the other quickly, this part at the bottom needs to be lifted up so that it's about 3/4 of an inch off the ground. That way this cymbal stand is resting on the 3 legs rather than on the bottom of the stand, like so. So the next piece of hardware that we're going to set up is the snare drum stand. And it looks like it's a stand on top of a stand. It's got 3 feet and then 3 claws which hold the snare drum in place, which are tightened, and I'll show you now before the snare drum's on, by this big kind of wing nut looking thing right there. Okay, that adjusts these to go up and to go down. Okay, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's start with the feet. Okay, the feet need to be positioned so that the angle adjuster, which should stay in place, but I'll show you which one it is. Okay, it adjusts the angle of the snare drum. That angle adjustment knob needs to be facing towards the drummer. If that's facing towards the drummer, we can expand the feet of the snare drum stand. And we expand them so that they fit between the 2 pedals. This area between the 2 pedals is where the snare drum stand goes. And we adjust them so that they're not actually touching any of the other pedals or stands down here. Okay? But they're about as wide as they can get. That gives us a good firm base for our snare drum. Once that's tightened in place, we can then loosen these claws and get our snare drum and place it within these 3 claws. Now the claws have 3 pieces, they have rubber on each end, okay? And the snare drum needs to sit inside there so that it is ready and sturdy. So once you've gotten the snare drum, you'll notice that the skin or the head has a logo at the top. That should always, like any of these, should be facing towards the drummer. Because at the bottom, directly opposite it, we have our snare wire, which you can see on the bottom. We have our snare wire tensioner, okay? The snare wire tensioner should be right in the crotch of where the drummer sits. So, we'll turn it around so it's facing the right way, and we'll place the snare drum within inside these 3 claws. Now, we want to make sure that it's lifted up, because what these rubbers tend to do is catch on the rim of the snare. So we'll make sure that that is sitting inside and on top of the rubbers, and then that little wing nut thing I showed you beneath here, we tighten it so that those claws get tensioned about the rim of the snare drum. Now, a thing to keep in mind, we want to avoid these claws with the rubbers sitting directly on top of one of these lugs. Okay? The lugs is what tightens everything. And so if we're tightening against those lugs, it's going to change the sound of the snare drum. And so just if that takes place, just rotate the snare drum just a little bit so that those claws are not actually tightening directly on top of those lugs. We'll tighten it up. And we'll tension it so that if I was to pick up the snare drum from the rim, the stand would gently come up with it. That way I know it's tensioned correctly. And positionally, my head with the logo is facing towards me, and my tensioner is sitting right in the crotch. So next we have the floor tom. And the floor tom has 3 legs, or 3 feet, that should all be facing outward from the drum. Okay? We put them inside like so, coming up from the bottom, and then they should be in line with the dotted line that's marked there on the drum. We do one, and the second one, making sure that the feet are facing outwards, not underneath the drum, facing outwards, in line, tighten them up, and the last one, facing out, in line, tighten it up, and the same thing again. We want the logo that's on the actual head to be facing towards the drummer. Okay, so we put it like so. The one thing to keep in mind, and if you can move the camera just down here, is this 1 foot should actually be just underneath the edge of this bass drum. If that 1 foot is underneath the edge of the bass drum and that Evans logo is facing towards the drummer, if I can fit my right leg in between the floor tom and the snare drum with about 2 inches on either side, you have it in the right position. And the last step for this is to pull that bass drum case over so that the flat side is in line with the edge of this floor tom, and that is going to be where we put our the headphones and the metronome and the mixing board on top of a little bit later on. Cool. So now we're going to start talking about the cymbals and the cymbal stands and how they get set up. We start out on the left hand side and we work our way around to the right hand side. This is called the ride cymbal stand, and you notice that all the cymbal stands are labeled. We start with a 22-inch, we move to an 18-inch, and this is a crash. Then on the other side we have the 16-inch crash, we have the hi-hats which are 14-inch, and then we have a little extension on top of the 16-inch cymbal stand for a splash, and I use the 10-inch splash. There's a few different splashes, but find the one that has 10-inch on top. All the cymbals are labeled, okay? So this one should say crash 18-inch, and so if you find the right stand, you can put it on the correct stand there. And as I said earlier, all the telescopic extensions on these stands should stay the same. When you're tearing down the drum kit, make sure that you don't adjust these telescopic extensions. They do have lines marked on there, okay, on both of these. However, try and leave them the same. It just makes it that much easier for setup and for tear down, okay. Now the basses. With a cymbal stand bass, some people like to push them all the way to the ground like so, to try and give it the biggest bass. Other people like to have them a little closer, the feet a little closer together. And I'll tell you the problem with each. Firstly, when they're too close like that, if I hit the cymbal, it's going to fall over. Secondly, if it's too low to the ground, it doesn't give any support to this upright post. Okay, and so we want to have the best of both worlds. We want to have a good solid bass. We want to have good support between here and here for this upright post. And so there is a line that I've marked on these when you're setting up the stands that'll give you the best of both worlds. So when it comes to the boom stand, they have an adjuster, as you can see here, which changes the angle. It also allows the boom to move towards or away from the drummer. Okay. Now I've marked the line on these boom stands for where each of them needs to be. This is the ride stand, and so once we have that line there set here in this clip, the angle that I like to have each of these set at is 45 degrees. If they're about 45 degrees and the clip is within the lines that are marked there on that boom, we can tighten them up. Now, the angle for the cymbal should stay the same. It's like this telescopic stand. It should stay the same. The only two things that we're going to be adjusting on these boom stands is A, the angle, and B, the base. Okay? So that's important for when we tear it down, because when we tear it down, and I'll show you it now, we just loosen so that it's straight, and we loosen the base so it makes a nice straight stand that can fit then in the hardware cases. But we're setting it up, and once we have the stand in position, have my line there to reference, have my lines there to make sure that they're right in the middle, and it's at 45 degrees. Okay. I can then attach my cymbal. Now, each of the cymbal stands has a wing nut and 2 felts, either 2 felts or 2 rubbers. The cymbal always needs to go between 2 felts or 2 rubbers. The cymbals are really expensive, and so we want to make sure that they stay protected, especially at the point where they contact steel. So, I have my 22-inch ride stand, I have my 22-inch ride. I place it on top of the first felt. I then take my second felt, put it over the top, and then I take my wing nut and I put the wing nut on and I tighten it all the way until it stops. Okay? And then that gives me my ride in position, ready to go. Same thing goes for all the cymbals. We have our 45-degree angle, we have our booms adjusted so that they're between the lines, and we have our base adjusted so we get the best of both worlds. And those cymbals, I'll show you what position they need to be in from an overhead view, because when you see it from an overhead view, it'll be much easier to get those into position and know where they go from the beginning. Alright, so next we have the hi-hats, okay, and the hi-hats are labeled, one as the top and one as the bottom. They're 14 inches. We'll start with the bottom, okay. The bottom will go and start by just sliding straight on this pole all the way to the bottom. This is the only cymbal that doesn't have a felt on the top and the bottom, okay. It just has a felt because it just rests on that felt. Now, I've already taken this off, but this is the attachment for the top. Okay, usually when it's packed down, you'll see that sitting on the hi-hat stand like so. Okay, so the first step is you'll take that off, you'll put your hi-hat bottom and slide it on and just rest it on that bottom felt, and then you'll work with this piece. Now this piece is a little tricky, so let's come in close and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is our bracket or the attachment for our hi-hat top, and it has 2 felts, and this bottom nut, it's kind of a round nut, it comes off, and then we take the bottom felt off and leave the top felt on. Now it's threaded almost the whole way through, so we take the top side that has the wing nut, we place it through from the top of the hi-hat, and then the easiest way is to turn it over like so. Put that felt on the bottom. Now this particular nut is unique. One side is threaded, the other side you'll notice it's not threaded. Okay, and the side that's not threaded has this little 45-degree cutout off it. Okay, so we take the side that's threaded and we thread it back on to this clip. Now the thread's not that great on here, so make sure you're not cross-threading it when you tighten it. You'll know if it's cross-threaded because you'll get about 5 turns in and it'll just stop like it did there. Okay? If that's the case, back it off and make sure that when you thread it on, you're threading it on so that is going on completely. And you'll know that it's on correctly because it'll actually tighten against those felts. Okay? Now we don't want to get it so that it's so tight that, you know, you can't tighten it anymore. You want to get it so that it's firm, okay? And this is the reason, okay? If we back out a little bit, I'll show us putting it back on top of this hi-hat and how the whole assembly works together. Alright, so we've tightened it against the felts, not too tight, but just enough so that those felts are a little bit compressed and they're firm, okay? Then I'm going to turn the hi-hat top back over. Okay, and I'm going to take it and slide it back onto this post here. Okay. Now, we have the top, which has 2 felts, the bottom, which has just the felt resting underneath. What you'll do is with your foot, you'll press down on the pedal so that this travels about 1 inch down. Once that's traveled 1 inch down, you can just tighten this wing nut right here. And when you release your foot off the pedal, what you'll notice is that these hi-hats move away from each other. Okay? And so we have almost an inch of travel there. Okay? And what that allows me to do is when I'm hitting those hi-hats, it can change the sound. If I'm hitting them when they're close, it's a very sharp, distinct sound. When they're about half open, they kind of sizzle, and when they're completely open, they rattle. Now, if this is tightened too much, I'm not going to get that sizzle, and that rattle is really not going to be there where it needs to be. So just get it nice and firm, but not too tight. Right, and that's ready to go. So once all our cymbals are in place and we have our hi-hats ready to go, the last cymbal that we're going to attach is the splash cymbal. And it has a little extension that we use. It attaches to the top of the 16-inch crash stand, and it attaches at the very top of that, so that once it's in place, okay, this little extension stand is sitting over the top of the open hi-hats. You know, once we have an inch there, it's probably going to sit about an inch above that, so that the hi-hat just sits to the outside, or the drummer's left, audience is right, okay, and we can hit that easily from there, okay. But let's talk about this stand here for a little bit, okay. It's kind of unique. It has a wing nut, which then closes over through that groove and tensions. Now the thing I find the most with this stand is that this is either tensioned too much, okay, and this side loose, so that it kind of creates an angle like so. Ideally what we want is we want an parallel clamp, so that these, once they're attached about the stand, are the equal distance on this side and an equal distance on that side. That gives us the best clamp so that this stand doesn't move when I hit it. So loosen this a little bit, we'll get it into position, we'll tighten it, and sometimes might need a little loosening on one side to get the other side into position. But once that's in position, we'll tighten it up so that it sits at the top of that telescopic stand before it gets to the boom, okay, and on the outside, okay, or to your right of the hi-hat stand, okay. And once that's in position like so, and you can check that these distances are equal on either side of that, tighten it up, and it's just a simple case of putting the 10-inch splash between the two felts on the stand. And that is how we get the splash attached. Alright guys, so from a drumming standpoint, acoustically we're set up and ready to go now, okay? We have all our drums in position, we have our stands, and we have our cymbals on top. But what I wanted to show you is just how the heights of the cymbals should be already preset, okay? We've worked on our bass, okay? And we have our best of both worlds bass set up for each of these stands, okay? Then our telescopic height adjustments should stay where they are. So the height shouldn't be moving at all, okay? Then our booms, okay, they're set, we have our lines, and they're always at 45 degrees. And so what you're going to notice is that these two crash cymbals should be at the same height. Then our ride cymbal, the angle, should always stay the same, and it should be a few inches above our floor tom, okay? Our hi-hat, its telescopic stand, should always stay the same. It should be sitting about an inch above the bottom hi-hat. And then our splash, which is way over there, it's ready to go. It's sitting, once again, about an inch above our open hi-hats. Now, once all of these cymbals are in place like so, I'm going to show you what it looks like from above so that you can see how these stands are positioned. Now, ultimately, when the drummer comes on Sunday morning, if it's me, I'm just going to adjust these maybe just tiny little bit so that it's feeling good for the morning, okay? But let's have a look what they look like from above. So we've got the cymbals set up. The heights are adjusted, the booms are at 45 degrees, and our cymbals are between the two felts. What you'll notice is that it's relatively symmetrical. we have our drums here, and our cymbals are overlapping each of these toms by about the same amount. Our hi-hat is just off to the side of our snare drum, and our ride is covering about a third of the floor tom. What that allows and what that means is that I can actually reach each of these cymbals without having to move too far. They're not getting in the way of each of these toms, and it allows me to be able to play the drums pretty freely. What the beauty of now we have here is that our heights of our cymbals should be the same. If we're using our 45 degrees on our booms and putting them between the markers, we should have them in a position where if I need to adjust them just a little bit on Sunday or Saturday, I can just move the stand a little further away or a little closer, just to get them in the perfect position. But if the stands are set, we should be good to go. Cool, so here's our equipment for a microphone in the drum kit. Ultimately what we want to do is we want to get the signal or the sound from the drums back to the soundboard, allow those guys to mix it, and then send a signal back to me, which not only includes the drums, but all the other instruments and singers in the worship team. Okay? And this is the equipment that helps us to do that. Okay? Firstly, we're going to have to set up some stands to help these microphones stay in position. Okay? We'll go over that in a minute. However, what we have here is the way that this equipment gets packed down and the way it should look after each service. Alright guys, when we're going to start microphoning, we're going to start with the bass drum. Really, if you've got a few roadies working the drums at that point, you can get each of the microphones set up. But we have our bass drum microphone stand. Okay. Now this one is going to be adjusted so that we have about 2/3 at the end which the microphone attaches to, and this is our bass drum microphone. Goes straight into the clip here and straight out like so. 2/3 towards the microphone, 1/3 at the end, and adjusted angle wise so that when this bass with the 2/3 on this side is lined up over here with the bass drum, we want this microphone to sit inside, about an inch inside this hole that we have here. Okay? And adjusted so that that angle is going to stay during worship. We'll attach our microphone leads, the cables, to each of these microphones once they're in position. The next instrument that we want to microphone, or the next drum that we want to microphone, is the snare drum. Okay? You'll notice these SM57s, one is labeled for the violin, the other one for the trumpet, and the last one we have here is for the snare drum. Now, the snare drum attachment is actually in 2 pieces at the moment, which it shouldn't be. It should be in one piece like so, and then the clip. And I'll show you how this actually attaches to the snare drum. So this clip right here, or this claw, okay, attaches to the bottom rim of the snare drum. I like to have it in this pocket between the hi-hat and the first tom-tom right here. Okay, and I like to have the adjuster on the top. We put it just underneath the rim of the snare drum and we slide it so that it sits over the top and tighten it accordingly, so it's nice and firm. Then next we have the actual microphone attachment. Now this part here you can loosen, and so that it can position the angle of the microphone. But what we want to do is put it inside here so that, we'll tighten that. If you can see this microphone, when I slide that microphone into the microphone clip, it is high enough so that this microphone is angled down towards the middle of the snare drum. Great, so I just wanted to show you from this angle how this microphone is positioned in relationship to the snare and the hi-hat and the tom-tom, and then the angle that it positions towards the snare. Okay. Firstly, you'll notice it's above the height of the snare drum. Okay, it allows it to be at an angle about 45 degrees once again, pointed down towards the middle of the snare drum, about halfway between this tom-tom and the hi-hat. Okay. Then we're going to put microphones on each of these toms. And the way that we do that is we use these clips. Now you'll see you can either clip it in position 1, position 2 or position 3. And I always like to have it in position 1. What we'll do is we just take it position 1 and clip it at the top of the tom-tom. Okay? And then this will hook underneath the rim. Okay? If I'm showing you from here, it'll clip just underneath that rim, like so. Okay? But we'll always do it at the top of the tom-tom. Okay? Top of the tom-tom, position 1, clip it in. That tom has not been tightened accordingly, so it needs to be tightened up. Okay? And once that's in position, we can then take our Sennheiser microphone, okay, and we'll loosen until it's completely out. We'll position it so that the microphone is once again pointing towards the tom, or the head, the batter head. And we'll take this screw and we'll put it through the clip, okay, and then we'll tighten it back into that hole. Okay. Now while that's tightening up, you'll notice that you can either adjust it so that it's at the very top, which gives it a big distance away from that batter head, or you can adjust it so that it's at the very bottom. Okay. For consistency purposes, I like to have it at the very bottom of that bracket so it's nice and close. And then we can just adjust the angle a little bit so that it angles towards the middle of that tom. Same thing, position 1, top of this tom in position. We adjust and put the microphone in, like so. Making sure that it's towards the bottom of the clip when it's tightened. Okay, the very bottom. That needs to be tightened up a little bit too. And with the floor tom, it's just like our snare drum. We want to have it between the ride cymbal and that second tom-tom. Okay, and so we're clipping it on here in that gap, and we're putting the microphone in position just like these other two. Alright, next we have our overhead microphone stands to set up. Okay, one of these has actually a telescopic boom. Okay, you see the boom extends telescopically. I like to have that one over the top of the hi-hat. Okay, and then the other one goes over the top of the ride, and I'll show you how that is set up. Firstly, we want to make sure that these feet are extended, and when they're in position, it's going to sit out here just outside of the cymbal. Okay, we'll adjust our boom to 45 degrees, and we'll adjust the telescopic height to a height which is about a foot above the crash. Okay, we'll get our overhead microphone, which at the moment are these Audix F15s, okay, and we'll get our overhead microphone and we'll place it inside the microphone clip, and we'll adjust it so that it is pointing down, okay, when it's in position. It is pointing down directly over the top of the hi-hat, okay. It's going to pick up this crash cymbal, this splash cymbal, but predominantly I want it pointing right at the hi-hat, okay, and overhead. Same thing on the other side. We're going to set up this microphone stand. Now with all the cymbal stands, remember, these stay in position. Because these microphone stands are so much taller, okay, we do extend the telescopic boom, or this telescopic height. We keep our cymbal boom stands at 45 degrees. We set it out so that now this other microphone, the other overhead microphone, is positioned right over the top of the middle of this ride cymbal. It's also going to pick up some of this crash cymbal, but it's going to be pointed directly over the top of the center of this ride cymbal, right over the bell. Now, if everything is adjusted correctly, what you're going to notice, and that one could probably come down a little bit, we want it about 12 inches above the height of that cymbal. what we're going to notice is that these two overhead microphones are pointed directly down and they're at the same height. Next, we're going to show you how to set up the information that's coming back, or the sound that's coming back from the board, to the drummer's ears. Great. Alright, remember the splash? Okay, we used a little extension to hold the splash in position. The last piece of hardware that you're going to need to set up is this extension for the metronome. Okay, we've talked about how to attach this to the cymbal stand, but it's the same thing with the ride cymbal stand. Okay, we just place that on there. We make sure that the brackets are parallel to each other and that they're clamping evenly, so that this is not moving when it's used. And that's going to be pointed directly towards the drummer. Now, the metronome has a thread in here, okay, but we put a felt between it. And the reason being is because when I tighten this without the felt, it ends up facing like that, okay? Or if I wind it back to that position, it's going to be loose. So the felt just helps us to get the right tension on there. So once that's on there, and we're winding it on, we'll wind the metronome on till there's some tension between the metronome and the bracket, and that felt helps us to get it in position so it's nice and tight. Okay, and that's facing towards the drummer. The next piece of equipment that we're going to need here is the mixing board. Now the mixing board has the information relayed back to me into channel 1 and the line in. So there'll be a line that comes in and it says drum H. Drum H will get plugged into the top of channel 1 where it says, just below where it says line. Okay, and that'll be just a small jack that looks like so. Okay, that will get plugged into channel 1 line in. Now this little cable, which has the yellow tips on it, is labeled metronome and drums. Okay, this, what it does is it sends a signal from the metronome into channel 2 on the board. Okay, and so where it says drums, you plug it into channel 2. Okay, and where it says metronome, you'll plug it into the, and I'll show you this so that you can see it from this side. Okay, there's a small plug here. The first of the large plugs is where this cable goes into. Okay, it says metronome. Okay, tighten that up. What that does, that sends a signal from the metronome into this mixing board, and so that I can mix the sound that's coming in from all the instruments as well as from the drums, along with the timing metronome, into my headphones. Now the headphones look like this. Okay, the headphones have a little adapter that plugs in here to where it says phones. Okay, and so that'll plug right directly into there, and that will allow me to adjust the volume, adjust the mix of everything that I'm hearing while I'm playing drums. Last thing, but no least, is the power adapters. Okay, we have a power adapter that runs here for the board that gets plugged in and tightened, and the metronome also has a power adapter. Okay, power adapter for the metronome simply gets unwound and plugged in here, and these get plugged in to the power supply. Other than that, I really appreciate you guys helping setting up the drums. You guys are now master drum technicians. If you ever have any questions on how to set up the drums, please feel free to ask. But otherwise, thanks very much and good stuff.